I'm a product manager at Atlassian. I'm mostly looking at DevOps enabling capabilities within the Atlassian ecosystem and leading the change management change management domain within Atlassian as a product manager. I'm working with some great engineers and designers in rolling out our change management capabilities. And just like any other organization and any large organization such as Atlassian, we also, not only are we trying to solve DevOps related problems for our customers, but also are practicing DevOps within the organization itself. And today, I hope to bring you some, 5 serverless power-ups and serverless related infrastructure to better any DevOps practice. Now, Shireen has given me the free hand to go over the dedicated time. So I shall abuse this power and maybe go in 15 minutes or 20 minutes in this talk, right? And maybe we can go into more detail into these infrastructures and how we can actually leverage serverless, right? So before we even get into, the 5 infrastructures, the 5 serverless infrastructures, let's just talk about, what DevOps means for us and what the goals of a DevOps infrastructure is or DevOps pipeline is. And, I'm sure the previous speakers have, talked about DevOps a bit and, introduced the topic. So we already know what DevOps means. What is the goal though? Well, the entire value that we hope to achieve with DevOps is to allow teams to build faster, to increase velocity while maintaining the resiliency and the availability of the systems that we're building on, right? And what we have seen here is we want to promote, to do this, we try to promote a shift left, bringing things closer or consolidating them through the by breaking down silos. So there are 2 pillars that I want to talk about. One pillar or one goal that whenever we are thinking about implementing a DevOps, any DevOps tool or infrastructure, there are 2 goals that we should really consider. One is to break down the silos that exist between the various stages of a development pipeline, right? And over here we can see the development pipeline, build, plan, continuous integration and deployment, monitoring, operate, and then feedback. And what we want to do, we want to bring all of that and consolidate that, right? We want to break down the silos that separate this. And the reason for this is because one of the major problems was before DevOps, and one of the major motivation for DevOps was that we saw Dev and Ops acting separately. And what would happen is that Dev would throw over code. There was this thing, throwing it over the wall to Ops. And all of a sudden, Ops receives this, right? And when something goes wrong, when an incident occurs, right, then it's very difficult for Ops to know or to remediate that incident effectively without any background or contextual information, which lies with Dev, right? So we're trying to break down the silos and facilitate that communication, right? And another thing we want to do is, now that we're trying to consolidate this information, we're trying to break down the silos, it's practically impossible to, maintain everything. It's like, when you talk about DevOps practicing teams, a DevOps practicing team cannot practically maintain and practice every stage of the development pipeline. So what we also want to do is we want to promote automation and ease of maintenance, right? So the 2 pillars, just to summarize, are we want to break down silos and we want to try to automate everything as much as possible to make it easier for teams to manage this development pipeline under the umbrella of DevOps, right? Now, why am I talking about serverless, and how does serverless help us over here? Well, for those who, I'm not sure about how many people are fully aware of serverless or serverless technologies, but just to go over the benefits of what serverless technologies provide us, is that it's fully managed, first of all. So it allows the reduction of infrastructure setup. And that what it means is that it frees the developers to focus on business logic and other areas of the DevOps pipeline. The other areas of the DevOps pipeline that we saw. because, like there's one thing about maintaining and operating your system, but now also trying to set up those infrastructures, set up these your your deployment servers and your CI/CD servers, setting up your compute servers, and dealing with all those configurations. Now that is a very difficult task. Having that all of those responsibilities abstracted away to the cloud vendors really frees up developers to help for them to better focus on other areas of the development pipeline, right? Another thing is that it's scalable, right? And scalability is a very intrinsic part when it comes to the resiliency and availability of the system, right? So again, the goal of DevOps is to develop faster, push code, push changes into production faster while maintaining that resiliency and availability. And when you have scalability and automatic scalability, you're already, helping with the first goal of, automating things, right? Pardon me, my dog has also decided to join us for this content. Very interested in, learning about serverless for DevOps also. So anyways, and finally, what we want to do is what we have is the pay-as-you-go model, right? The thing is that, especially when we're looking at changes in an enterprise solution or changes in your organization and your team, you're leveraging a lot of tools to help you with, and a lot of tools and a lot of changes in your practices to help you adopt these DevOps practices. And the thing is that if the practices themselves, if the tools themselves, if the ancillary support for DevOps itself is so costly, what we see is a restriction. It's a barrier to adoption of DevOps, right? And the pay-as-you-go model helps us to maintain and manage and keep that cost reduced, right? So, for example, if we see that, pardon me, if we see that we have a high cost to adoption, then we automatically hit a barrier of adoption of DevOps, right? Now, so those are the three benefits that we will see repeated within our talk as we go over the 5 different architectures, that the 5 different use cases of DevOps, right? Now, so the first use case that I want to showcase is performance monitoring, right? So in the Opsgenie product, what we used to do was we used to have monitoring and transactional Lambda functions, right? So also one thing that I forgot to mention in the beginning of this course, in the beginning of this talk, was that we will look at this through the lens of AWS services, but that does not mean we're restricted to AWS services, right? There are a lot of service offerings across various cloud vendors. So continuing, we will see, what we did in Opsgenie back in the day was we used to have monitoring and transactional Lambda functions. So Opsgenie was built on a fully AWS infrastructure, right? And what we used to do was we had these monitoring Lambda functions that used to impersonate users, right? And they would impersonate various user actions, such as creating certain items, or creating a user, or creating an alert. If anybody's familiar with the Opsgenie product, which is a alert consolidation and incident management tool. So it would create alerts and it would do various actions. And then we would like to see how we respond in production and staging to these requests and these different behaviors of the users that we're impersonating. And that is captured by our transactional Lambda functions. And you can monitor these transactions. So one of the problems with serverless is that it's very hard to monitor what is actually going on in a serverless infrastructure. And the reason for that is because a lot of the responsibilities and underlying architecture, underlying infrastructure of serverless is abstracted away to the cloud. And what that creates is it creates a black box. Now peering into that black box, there are a lot of monitoring tools that are available. Here, for example, I proposed using Tundra, which helps us in serverless monitoring, and there are lots of other serverless monitoring tools that are out there, right? But anyways, so what we see over here is we see several user impersonating Lambda functions which send API requests, various API requests to our service on the AWS infrastructure. Then we use a serverless monitoring tool to monitor the responses that we get in our transactional Lambda functions to understand how our service is actually responding, right? In this process, we actually use Opsgenie itself to get any alerts on these, services. So, for example, if we go forward, here, as you can see, we have the Opsgenie. As you can see, we're using Opsgenie events for automatic remediation. So this actually flows into the next use case that I want to talk about, which is automated resolution. Now, automated resolution is part of the incident management lifecycle, right? So again, when we try to maintain availability, right, and we want to automate the action of maintaining availability, we can look towards automated resolution, right? And again, here we see we leverage some serverless infrastructure such as EventBridge. So EventBridge is actually a very powerful tool that AWS offers. And what we see is, for example, in this use case, we are monitoring our infrastructure from various monitoring tools such as Datadog, Dynatrace, New Relic, and whatnot. So we're using a lot of integrations with Opsgenie. Now, when we look at the incident workflow, the incident workflow is we need to first get alerted of the incident, right? That something is going wrong. Then we need to try to investigate that what is actually going on, right? And then we want to start the remediation process after we identify that something has gone wrong. Now, so in the beginning of the diagram, as from Datadog and Dynatrace and New Relic, we get alerted. So we are now alerted. And there are several times that incidents actually get repeated or issues are repeated, right? So for example, let's say there's some of your Kubernetes pods or clusters are being overused, and you want to spin up new Kubernetes clusters with your AWS EKS through your AWS EKS. By understanding the payload of the alerts and then feeding this into EventBridge, and then using EventBridge routing rules according to the alerts that you get from Opsgenie, you can route your alert to the specific area of your AWS infrastructure. And again, you can have a layer of Lambda functions, which is AWS's serverless compute services. You can have a layer of Lambda functions to perform the required remediation steps, or you can directly send trigger events from EventBridge, triggering certain actions in your AWS infrastructure. So that is a form of automated resolution, right? So another thing that use case, the third use case actually that I want to go towards is pipelines for continuous deployment, right? So continuous deployment is where is the process where when a change is pushed or when a PR is created, then we see an automatic rollout of that change. And so that's the difference between continuous deployments and continuous delivery, right? Now, in this specific use case, I'm looking at GitOps, right? Where we are changing or we're rolling out changes to Kubernetes infrastructure directly, right? So for example, what we have over here is that we have the developer who makes the commits. And let's say they make the commit to Bitbucket pipelines where they're building the image, right? That image is automatically then pushed to the Docker registry, right? And while it is also pushed to the Docker registry, we use Helm charts to pull those images that have been pushed to Bitbucket into an S3 bucket, for example. And then from the S3 bucket, that event, we can configure a triggering event from the S3 bucket with Lambda functions to build those commit charts, to get those commit charts and send it to the cluster repo. And then we use a tool. So in this example, I'm using a tool called Weaveworks to synchronize the cluster, to help us synchronize the cluster and then eventually update our Kubernetes infrastructure. Now, of course, continuous deployment is a very dangerous practice because you're automatically sending, changes to your production environment. And, it's very scary not to have that barrier, that human barrier in between, right? Um, so like that human check in between. It's automatic. You create a pull request and automatically these things start getting triggered, and all of a sudden you see this change in production, and it's very scary, right? It's actually against, we talked about the goal, which is to maintain availability, and somebody would ask, oh, why are we doing this if we're not maintaining availability, right? So what we then, so that's why we have to ensure that before we are ready to roll out continuous deployment practices within our organization, we should ensure that we have very well remediation and monitoring capabilities. And that's where we can fall back on the previous use cases that I spoke about. Also, before we go into production, right, we can ensure that we have very good, as I said, before we go into production, we should have very good remediation and monitoring capabilities, and we should also have pre-production testing. And the next two use cases will actually talk about those examples, right? So now, let's, for example, if we speak about ChatOps, right? So ChatOps is a very up and coming area within the DevOps domain, right? Where we allow automation through the chat tools or the collaboration tools that we see in the organization. So this is great. Collaboration tools helps us break down the silos and facilitates communication, right? So for example, let's say we're using Slack and you have a bunch of developers or on-call members responding to an incident. Everybody's communicating on that Slack channel about the incident. And through the Slack channel itself, we are able to send commands to our AWS infrastructure or to our cloud infrastructure in which we are, where our system resides and where the problem persists. And again, here we see us leveraging AWS's Event Bridge, because again, AWS Event Bridge can be triggered and then has routing rules. So we can, again, configure those routing rules to send events as per the triggering events sent from Slack, right? So even on Slack, you can also you can write all these scripts and then like send them, integrate it with your Event Bridge, and then through Event Bridge, as we saw in our monitoring example, or pardon me, automated remediation example, ensure that that remediation event is sent to the right place of the AWS infrastructure. And then another thing I spoke about was the need to have some form of testing, or to ensure our testing is also robust, right? So there are new concepts coming up now, that are popping up due to the left shift that we're seeing, and also that is helping the DevOps adoption, such as remote debugging or CI observability. However, in this use case, what I want to talk about is continuous integration or load testing. And this is actually a very, very interesting use case that was promoted by Joyce Lin, who's the Director of Developer Relations at Postman, right? And the way we are using this is that we're leveraging Postman's open source project, which is called Newman, to orchestrate several Postman collections and to run several Postman collections in sync, right? So for example, we see the need to, so what we see is in the first step, we're writing a bunch of test plans using we're writing a lot of test plans using Postman collections. Then while using Postman collections, we run in parallel these collections with Newman to establish a baseline. So we're sending these requests to our environment in staging. So this is our environment in staging, and we're sending these requests, and according to the responses, we are setting these baselines for our SLOs and SLIs, right? And then once we set the baseline, we can incrementally increase the load or decrease the load using the scalable, feature, the auto scalability feature of Lambda functions, right? And then finally, like in this use case, I'm using Datadog to actually monitor our responses, because Datadog has an SLO and SLA monitoring capability, right? So again, this is one use case. This is the last use case that I actually wanted to show, right? And if we look at all of these use cases together, these are all ancillary use cases, right? Use cases to help us in our DevOps practice. However, serverless is not just ancillary practices, right? You can use serverless even beyond just even beyond just supportive tools, right? For example, you should really look at serverless for active multi-region systems, especially, right? And this is something that Adrian Hornsby talks about extensively, and I also spoke about in his session of serverless chats with Jeremy Daly, right? And a lot of this is actually, and we know about active multi-region system that is promoted due to that very infamous Netflix outage, right? So with the Netflix outage of, that we saw, I don't remember, back in like the early 2010s, somewhere around then, right? And then, so why does serverless help over here? Because first, it's scalable, it's stateless, so you don't want state to be persisted in an active architecture. It helps with that, and it promotes that type of development and that thinking, right? Also, when you look at the serverless technologies that have been the development of the serverless technologies, so we see, like, for example, API gateways has custom domains now, and this allows us to target regional endpoints. You have global tables for DynamoDB. That's also a very huge help. That's fully managed global table that helps in conflict resolution when inserting data on regional stores. We have Route 53 for routing data. And again, this is also fully managed, especially the geo routing capability when you're looking at how requests are coming into your active multi-region systems. And of course, DNS failover and all of these things. And so there's a lot of development that's happening on these serverless offerings of these cloud services. Right. Another thing that we want to look at is event-driven microservices. Of course, serverless is all event-driven. All the 5 use cases that we saw were all event-driven. And another thing that serverless helps in is that like when you're building these microservices, you have marshalling and demarshalling. And EventBridge, for example, is a service that allows you to get rid of that marshalling and demarshalling overhead. There's a lot of communication overhead when you have these small microservices communicating with each other. And serverless just, the benefits of serverless and the serverless services offerings that we saw in the 5 previous use cases can be leveraged for that. And then finally, cost-saving architectures. Again, this is the pay-as-you-go model. Wonderful characteristic of serverless. By the way, serverless costs can go out of hand, right? So if you actually look at it, like if your serverless infrastructure is getting a lot of requests and is very traffic heavy, then you can actually expect your costs for serverless to go higher than what you would be using with containers or any other paradigm. So it is important to monitor your architecture, but if you are expecting low traffic or not that much use, then it's a very good cost saving solution. Finally, as I said, I don't want, we've talked about AWS services a lot, but I just want to say this isn't limited to AWS. There's also, you can also use Azure. So for example, the equivalence of AWS Lambda functions in Azure is Azure functions, and then the event bridges, event hub, and things like that. So you can practically build out your serverless ancillary support infrastructure to your DevOps pipeline using whatever cloud service cloud provider you're comfortable with, or your organization or team uses. And again, you should also think about building your actual system infrastructure with these tools. Now that so I just wanted to put that out there. So again, thank you so much for listening in, and I apologize for my dog in the background. I guess this is just some of the things that we have to deal with when we're doing live virtual talks. So again, thank you so much, DevOps Cairo, for having me, and I hope this was a very useful and informative session. And again, if you want to know more about all of this, or you just want to reach out to me, you can always reach out to me on Twitter or LinkedIn. And I would always be happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you so much.